If you're a business owner and you're running paid ads to acquire clients for your business, in this video, I'm gonna break down A to Z why you being a guest on the top ranked podcast in your niche is actually the #1 thing you could do to make your advertising more profitable. Now, if you're new here, I'm Devin Rodriguez, founder of podcastguest.io, and on this channel, we talk about one thing: how to leverage being a guest on podcast the right way as a vehicle to scale your business more profitably. And if you're a subscriber and you're watching, welcome back. We got a banger in this one. Now, here's the thing. If you're watching this, you're a business owner, you're probably doing multiple 5 figures, 6 figures, even 7 figures a month in your business. And a lot of the clients that you work with come from paid advertising. And at this point, it probably feels like you've built a predictable marketing system where you're consistently getting clients from your paid advertising. Maybe you're running a call funnel or webinar funnel or a challenge funnel or a lead magnet type of funnel. And then you have setters and closers on the back end of that, whatever it might be. You've probably been doing it for a while now and you've kind of got the hang of it. So with that being said, inevitably, you're looking at the landscape right now, and you've probably noticed that over the years, your ad costs have continued to rise. And there's a lot of reasons that we're gonna dive into in this video in terms of why that is, but there's probably part of you, if you've been in business long enough, that looks back to how it was a couple of years ago, where 2021, 2020, where you could pretty much just run an ad and you were going to make an incredible amount of money. Your ROAS was going to be crazy. Now, the reason why that was back then was because, simply put, there wasn't as much competition in the marketplace. There wasn't as many movers in the market. There weren't as many people running ads. There wasn't as many people with a similar offer. So your costs were inevitably lower simply because there was less people in the marketplace. So now, #1, the costs were lower because there were less people. #2, it was easier to close because there weren't as many options. And #3, it was also easier to close because the people you work with haven't been burned at that time as much as they have now. Now, I'm sure that you and your sales team speak with prospects all at a time. It's crystal clear why that person should buy. They're qualified on paper, but there's that level of uncertainty that they have in their mind that stops them from pulling the trigger. Like, they know that they need to do something, but they're just so traumatized by all of the things that they've done in the past that haven't worked that they inevitably show up to calls skeptical and guarded and don't move forward. They tell your team things like, "I'll think about it, give me 24 hours. And what ends up happening is you probably, as the business owner, sit back and you're like, damn, is it the leads? Is it the ads? Is it my sales team? Do I need to adjust the offer? And you just can't find the thing that allows you to scale your paid ads profitably, because on one end of the equation, your CPMs are rising, your cost per booked call is rising, your cost per qualified book call is rising, your show rate is dropping, your close rate has fallen, and now what ends up happening is your cost of acquisition has inevitably skyrocketed, which makes scaling your paid advertising feel impossible because it shrinks the margin you have in the business. So you probably ask yourself, is acquiring new clients really even worth it? Because let's be real, you've built this business in order to enjoy a certain lifestyle and make a lot of money. If we're not gonna virtue signal here and we're actually gonna tell the truth, you wanna make a lot of money. And you've done all of the things. You've hired the marketing agencies that inevitably promised you a bunch of qualified leads and brought you a bunch of garbage or didn't bring anything at all. You've probably hired the marketing mentors that were gonna promise to teach you the new funnel and all of this stuff. And sure, maybe it worked, but now it doesn't at the level it does. So you're at a point where you've pretty much tried everything that you know, and you're just continuing to do the same thing that has worked and hoping that that could be the thing to get you to the next place where you want to be. But I think it's safe to say that you know deep down inside right now that something has to change, because you could continue to scale your revenue, but you're not going to continue to scale the thing that really matters, which is your profit. And that is exactly why you being a guest on podcasts that are in your niche in front of your ideal clients is actually the #1 thing you can do right now without changing anything in your paid advertising to make your ads more profitable. And really, there's a couple of different reasons why. The first thing is that whenever you're running a paid ad, the prospects that you are speaking to through those paid advertisements have probably been burned time and time again by other people that they found from a paid ad. So now what ends up happening is 2 things. #1, your link click-through rate is probably lower than it has ever been, or it has been decreasing at the very least, simply because people don't believe people that run ads. Whether we want to believe it or not, that's just the way it is. Compared to 5 years ago, it's dramatically decreased in terms of the level of trust that exists within the market. As these marketers would say, we're in a trust recession, which is 100% true. There's a lower level of trust, and inevitably that leads to lower click-through rates. So now, if less people are clicking on your ad, the less people are going to become leads, the less people are going to book calls. But why aren't they clicking? Why don't they trust it? Because they don't know you. So if you go on a podcast that's one of the top ranked podcasts in your specific niche, imagine what happens now after they've seen you on a podcast and then they get hit with one of your ads. It's called the familiarity bias. People are more likely to take action on things that they are familiar with. Why? Because familiarity breeds trust. So now, if they just got done listening to you on a podcast for 45 to 60 minutes, now when they see your ad, you're no longer some random stranger promising them some grandiose thing on the ad. Now you're the trusted expert that they just saw on that podcast. Now they see the ad. They say, oh my God, that's the person I just saw on the podcast. This is the person I just saw on the ad. Let me click on the ad, because now they are familiar with you. So straight off the bat, the level of familiarity that podcasts are going to allow you to establish with your ideal client is going to dramatically increase every single metric inside of your paid advertising, simply because familiarity breeds trust. And the more they trust you, the more likely they are to click on that ad and take the action that's on the other side of that ad. So now that's gonna lead to higher click-through rates, lower cost per lead, lower cost per booked call, and ultimately what that's going to lead to is gonna be higher show rate and ultimately a higher close rate. Why? Because they have trust that's installed within them prior to that conversation. So now you haven't changed anything else in your funnel. All you've done is started to appear as a guest on the top ranked podcast in your industry, which now people are starting to see everywhere, which is going to make the advertising more profitable. But here's the other part of the equation. It all boils down to safety. See, people in today's market are really buying from people that make them feel the most psychologically safe. Because as we've talked about in this video, people have been burned time and time again, that they're afraid that if I take this leap of faith, that it's just gonna turn out like the last 5 or 6 things that I've tried that inevitably haven't worked. The amount of people that I've spoken to that have said things like, they promised me this, but they delivered me this. I paid this person 15 grand and they literally disappeared and I never heard from them again. I paid somebody 10 grand and they sent me one email 3 months later. I mean, it's crazy what people have gone through. Just reflect on your own situation as an example. So people enter your sales process with that frame of reference. So what ends up happening is when they do book a call with your sales team, one of the reasons why they don't show up is because they don't think it's going to be valuable enough to show up to based upon all of the prior experiences that they've had up until this point. So your show rate is decreasing, not necessarily because you're doing anything wrong inside of your funnel, but because you don't have any way to build trust and differentiate yourself within that funnel. Now, one of the best ways that we leverage podcast in order to increase show rate is going to be 2 separate ways. Number one way is going to be inside of your sales process. So let's say you run a call funnel. One of the best things that you can do to increase your show rate and your close rate immediately is to take one of the podcasts that you've appeared on, give it to your sales reps, and then your sales reps manually reach out to the prospect prior to the sales conversation. Notice what I said. I did not say that go to the CRM and send a text from Go High Level or HubSpot or whatever platform they're using. Why? Whether you want to believe it or not, it's just true. People respond to people that personalize communication to them. Now, you're probably saying,
Devin, I already send out my pre-text reminders and I do all of these things and, well, look where that's gotten you.
So what you want to do is you want to take an iPhone and you want to make sure your sales reps have iPhones that they can manually text prospects from prior to a sales conversation, because number one, people are more likely to respond to a blue bubble than a green one. And I think you could agree with that. Now we can take, once we've manually established communication with that lead, which is extremely important in terms of show rate, is manual establishment of communication as quickly as possible, meaning the moment that they go and they book a call, we want to be all over them as quickly as we can so that we can establish that sense of commitment from them. Like, hey, I'm going to be there. They heard from us immediately, but also
think about this. We're differentiating ourselves from everybody else in the marketplace that's relying on all of these corny, cheesy, freaking pre-text reminders and stuff like that.
But now here's where the podcasts come into play. Let's say you go on a podcast that's a really great show in your niche. You drop some fire on that show. You implemented all of the training we talk about on this video of how to actually engineer the conversation in a way where it's installing beliefs, it's answering your prospects' questions before they ever enter your sales process, it's overcoming their objections, it's setting expectations. You can find so much of that on our channel here. But now what your sales rep does is they could take that and they say to the prospect,
"Hey, John, our founder, Devin, wanted me to personally send this podcast over to you because after looking at your application, he felt like this would add a lot of context to what we do so that we could spend our time on the call on higher level strategy."
So now your sales rep is taking the content from that podcast and putting it in front of that prospect, even if they came from a paid ad. And here's the key. You have to give the prospect a reason to consume that content. What we're saying is, hey, number one, my founder, Devin, personally looked over your application, and based upon your answers, he felt like this was the specific content that would add the most value. Number two, we're saying that the reason I want you to consume this is because it's gonna add context to what we do so that we could spend our time on higher level strategy. But then number three, and this is the psychological component here, the reason why people show up to your sales calls so cold and ultimately don't close, which directly correlates back to your ROAS, is because they don't trust you. They're not educated on what you do, why you're different, how it works, why it's gonna get them a result. But now it's very important that you understand that the way we spell trust is not T-R-U-S-T. It is T-I-M-E. The more time we get a prospect to spend with us prior to the sales conversation, the more they trust us. And the more they trust us, the more psychologically safe they feel that investing with you is going to be the right decision. So now if a lead comes from a paid ad, which of the two do you think is more likely to convert? The person that comes from an ad, books on the calendar, receives the pre-call reminders and text and emails, etc., and just shows up, or the person that came from an ad, booked a call, was manually reached out by the sales rep. The sales rep said, "Hey,
"Our founder wanted me to personally send this over to you because after looking at your application, he felt like this would add value and give you context on what we do so that we can spend our time on higher level strategy."
And spent 45 to 60 minutes consuming your content. Which of the two do you feel would be more likely to close? See, I'm a very logical guy. That's all I operate from, is purely a standpoint of logic. You and I both know that the second person would be way easier to close because of the level of belief that they will have installed inside of them prior to that conversation, even if they came from a paid ad. So by simply leveraging one of your appearances inside of your sales process, you're making your paid advertising way more profitable. Now, I know that there's somebody watching this right now, maybe it's you, and you're saying, "But Devin, not all of my prospects are gonna spend 45 minutes. Cool, but what if 1 out of every 4 does? And that increases your close rate by 10%. Would that have an effect on your business? So let me just give you an example, just so you can see how this ultimately will make your paid advertising more profitable and also help you grow your damn revenue. Okay, so let's say that right now you book 100 calls a month. Okay, out of those 100 calls, you got a 50% show rate. Out of those 50%, 20% close. So what that ultimately boils down to is 10 sales. So let's say you had a 5K offer, 10 times 5 means you're making 50 grand a month. So now if your show rate went from 50% to 60% out of 100 calls, now 60 people are going to show. If the close rate stayed the exact same at 20%, instead of 10 clients, now it's going to be 12 clients, which is an additional $10,000 of revenue on a monthly basis, $120,000 on a yearly basis, simply by leveraging the content from the podcast inside of your sales process. Now, if we also had an increase in close rate, which you inevitably would because your prospect is going to show up with more trust, I think you could kind of extrapolate how that would improve your ROAS and make your ads more profitable. But then here's the last part of the process. What we're actually seeing in today's marketplace, and this was actually validated by a video that Alex Hormozy did recently, where he was talking about the best ad strategies are actually content-first ad strategies, where it's literally you filming organic content and leveraging that as your paid ad, like your direct response paid ad. So as opposed to, sitting down in a studio like this and filming an ad and having a direct call to action, what we're actually seeing is that in today's marketplace, the thing that's leading to a lower cost per book call, lower cost per lead, higher click-through rate is natural and organic content. So with that being said, what you do when you take the content from the podcast is you begin to immediately leverage that content as ads. No call to action, nada. And what we're seeing is, like I said, lower cost per call, higher click-through rates, lower cost per leads. Why? Because it doesn't look like another ad. But if you do it right and you implement the things that we talk about on this channel, you're installing belief through the ad, where you're articulating to them why the things that they've done in the past hasn't worked and why your thing is different. So what ends up happening now is all of your metrics inside of your funnel become more profitable because you're using the content as your ad strategy, which in today's marketplace, Meta and all of these different platforms are rewarding you for. So now what that ultimately leads to is not only more profitable ads, because here's the reality, not every ad that you're gonna launch is gonna be super profitable, but you know just as well as I do that ad creatives are fatiguing faster than ever before. So you're constantly having to swap through ad creatives, which makes you as the business owner exhausted because you know you have other things to do in the business. Well, now you have all of this content from these podcasts that you go on that you can use and test as creatives, so you don't have to sit there filming new ads all day. So now take the content, you use that as all of your creative testing to find your winners, which inevitably is going to allow you to be more profitable because you know that if you can increase the output of the amount of ads that you test, the more likely you are to find winners that you can scale. And then the last part of the equation, which for me personally makes a huge impact specifically on show rate and close rate, is going to be how you leverage the content from these podcasts in the time frame that exists between the time that somebody registers for your sales event and shows up to that sales event. Whether it's a sales call, webinar funnel, whatever it is for you, but let's just take the sales call funnel as an example. See, the thing is that so many people are just focusing on how do I drive somebody to the call? But the most important piece of the puzzle, really, in today's economy is simple. Not just getting them to the call, but making sure that they show up as educated as possible. So like I said earlier, one of the best practices is having that manual establishment of communication between the sales rep and the prospect. But now what you can do is you take content from the podcast, leveraging the 4 quadrants of content, which should be the thing that your specific talking points are about. We talk about it on the page. And now what you're doing is the content that you're talking about on the podcast answers the questions that your ideal clients have before they ever enter your sales process. It overcomes any false beliefs that they have right now that's keeping them stuck where they are. It overcomes their objections before they ever know that they have them. And number 4, it's setting expectations. So now what you do is you take the content from those podcasts, and now that that person has gone ahead and booked a call, you create a custom audience inside of Meta or whatever platform, and you establish a retargeting campaign where now you're taking all of that content from that podcast and you're blitzing that person. What do I mean by that? 2 different ways. We call this long form and short form. And a lot of this, I have to give credit to one of my mentors, Jeremy Haynes, calls it the hammer them strategy. And what this is based upon you taking content from that podcast. And let's say you take the content, you slice it up into 30-second clips as an example. You're gonna do a short form blitz, and you're gonna do a long form blitz, and you're gonna do a segment-based blitz. I'll share what that means in a second. So short form, what you would do is you would create a custom audience of people that have gone ahead and signed up for a sales call. You want the amount of people in that group to be at least 100 people. So if you're not booking, 100 people in a 72-hour time period, just extend that out to whatever time period it would be. It would be like a 30 days as an example that it would take 100 people. The reason why is you want to have enough frequency so that it gets distributed to these people. Okay? Otherwise, it's not going to be distributed if there's not a big enough audience. So with that being said, what you do is you take these clips, you load them up into a retargeting ad campaign. And then what you're going to do is everybody that goes ahead and registers for your sales call, they're going to be blitzed with seeing short form content for you, where you're answering questions, you're overcoming objections, you're setting expectations, you're overcoming false beliefs. And what does that do? Familiarity breeds trust. So the more familiar they become, the more they trust you, the more they trust you, the more they're likely to show up, the more they're likely to show up, the more likely they are to close. So now what you're doing is you're placing short form content in front of them, but it's from a podcast. It's not pre-recorded content, so it looks natural, and stuff that looks natural increases the consumption rate. But now what you're doing is you're also going to take the long form podcast and you're going to put those into a separate retargeting campaign that targets the same exact people. So now you're targeting them and you're blitzing them with short form content and the long form podcasts. So you're literally taking organic long form podcasts and placing them in front of people before they show up to the sales event. So even if 10% of people consume that, they watch one podcast. Imagine if you got on 20. Imagine if you got on 10. Imagine the amount of consumption and time people spend with you prior to your sales event. And then the last type is what we call segments. Now, Dave Ramsey does this really well. He has a page on YouTube that he calls Dave Ramsey Highlights or something like that. And anyways, he'll take an hour-long podcast that he does and cut it up into like 3 to 10 minute segments where he's talking about one topic. So now you want to duplicate and replicate the same thing. Why? Because people consume content in different ways. Some people like short form, some people love the long form, hour long, but then some people like 3 to 10 minute segments. So what you do is you take the content from that podcast, you cut it up into 3 to 10 minute segments where you're going deep on one topic, and now you create a third Blitz campaign that's specifically called segments. So now you have short form retargeting, long form retargeting, and segment-based retargeting, which is speaking directly to how the different people in your audience are going to consume content, which is going to do one thing: increase the rate of consumption. The more they consume, the more educated they become. The more educated they become, the more they trust, the more they trust, the more they buy. So I know we got a little advanced on that last piece of the equation, but all that does is it blitzes people with information and education on who you are before the sales call, which increases the level of trust. So hopefully you see how that, based with manual communication from the sales rep, dramatically increases show rate and close rate and ultimately makes your advertising more profitable. So with that being said, listen, you being a guest on podcast is going to be one of the best things that you could ever do for your paid advertising, simply because of the effect that it has on the entire paid advertising process, as well as the sales process. Now, here's the thing. It's one thing to listen to me and to go out and like, oh, it sounds really good. Actually use this stuff, because it's been making a huge difference for the people that we work with inside of our company. As an example, take Tanner Chittister. He arguably is one of the biggest business coaches online today. He does about $1 million a month. He came to us because he said, Devin, my costs are sky high. Well, what we were able to do is get him booked on 12 of the top podcasts inside of his specific niche. And what did that do? Number one, he was able to double his business. I'm not going to sit here and say that you're going to do that, because I don't know if you're going to listen to a damn thing that I tell you to do. But why was he able to do that? Because he leveraged the podcast inside of his paid advertising and sales process. He was spending $500,000 a month. He said, Devin, my costs are so high. So what do? We take the content from those podcasts, incorporate them in the sales process and the paid advertising process, immediately increase of ROAS and profitability within the company, which is ultimately the thing that you're after. So don't go out and just say, that was a great video. Go out and actually implement this stuff. And if you're interested in working with us, down below, you can go ahead and apply to work with us, see if you qualify, and would love to show you how we can implement this inside of your business. But long story short, actually use this stuff, because you leveraging your podcast appearances inside of your paid advertising is the number one thing you could do right now to simply make your paid advertising more profitable and make you, the business owner, more rich.